See, this post was designed especially for sitting falcons on. What we're going to try and show you in this video is a general overview, which is a word I absolutely hate, on breeding birds of prey in captivity. I'm not going to go into immense detail. You're not going to see graphic scenes of birds mating, so don't get excited. Nor am I going to touch on things like artificial insemination, because that's a subject which is difficult and needs special handling. What we're going to try and show you is how we here at the National Birds of Prey Centre house the birds, how we look after them, feed them, and make life easy for them so that they will naturally breed on their own, and how we do a little bit of interfering and management by taking eggs, incubating, rearing babies to a certain age and returning them wherever possible to the young. This is for me the easiest way of doing breeding without too much interference, and I think it's the way that most of you should try and tackle it as well. But whatever you do, you must tackle breeding with a good reason. There's no point in trying to captive breed birds of prey, for example, that aren't wanted. This year, for the first time, I'm not going to double clutch my sakers. This is a saker falcon here called Lena, who we bred 3 years ago, who's quite good at going absent without leave, especially in Yorkshire. But I'm not going to ask her mum and dad to produce double the number of young this year, because people don't really want very many sakers, and there's no point in breeding something that people don't want. Unless anyone wants any cockerels, in which case you're welcome to the one out there that's making a horrible noise. There's also no point in breeding things like barn owls in vast numbers and releasing them back to the wild. There's a lot of people doing it, but most of them are doing it for the wrong reasons and not really doing the job properly. There is, however, a point in breeding birds that people do want, and breeding something like very rare species, for example, lugger falcons, which you can get hold of in this country. They're now a red list species. If we had a few of them being bred on a regular basis in this country, that means you've got a nucleus of a rare bird being kept safe over here, and that's a good reason for captive breeding.
Isn't she wonderful? Now, secretary birds, quiet please. Secretary birds come from Africa.
The National Birds of Prey Centre started life as the Falconry Centre in 1967. The plan was to be open to the public, to teach them about birds of prey, but also to try and breed birds of prey in captivity while there were visitors there. With very little help, we've succeeded amazingly well. We actually lead the world in the captive breeding field now. We've bred more species than any other single establishment there is. The idea was not to breed a lot of any one species for release back to the wild, but instead to breed small numbers from a lot of different species. In this way we would hold the interest of the visiting public, and hold my interest as well, but also be able to make available any information that people wanted on breeding species in the future. Chalky and I will go over here. Sarah, are you on your marks? Ready, steady, go! There goes the rabbit, there goes the eagle, into the wind, and then turning downwind. Run, Sarah! Keep going! And stop! A round of applause for the rabbit's legs. In captive breeding, this is what you're looking for. This is sort of the end and the beginning. And because we're sitting in front of the largest of my aviaries, I thought I'd show you the largest egg as well. This is a secretary bird's egg that is not going to do anything because it smells quite disgusting. But to get these, you have to have the right aviaries for the birds. And over the years, we've worked out roughly what we think is good for them. It doesn't make any difference whether it's a huge structure like this or whether it's one single aviary only 8 to 10 feet high in your garden. The principles are still the same. The birds are much more comfortable if they're only viewed or can only see out from one side. So we've built aviaries that are 3 sides solid with a completely solid roof and one side open. With some of the more nervous birds, we've lined the inside of the open side with a material called Netlon windbreak to stop them hurting themselves. But birds of prey are fascinated by looking at things, so I really think they need to be able to look out and see things. That almighty crash you just heard was an Andean condor landing on its perch. These aviaries have a completely solid roof because the weather in Britain is not really that good most of the time. You can make it with 3/4 roof or even half roof, but I reckon you need a minimum of 10 foot covered to keep the birds, and more important, the nest ledge, the eggs, and hopefully the babies, well sheltered in inclement weather. The most important thing in your aviary is going to be access. Here with these aviaries we have a central passage with aviaries off either side, but it doesn't matter where you put your access passage. It can be at the back, at the side, whatever is most suitable for where you're building it in your garden. The reason it's important is you need to be able to see the birds without disturbing them, feed them without disturbing them, clean them out without risking losing them through a single door, and be able to get to the nest ledge to check on eggs and babies with minimum disturbance. Wherever you build the access passage, build it a decent size. There's nothing worse than wheeling a barrow down the passage to clean out the aviaries and removing all the skin on your knuckles on the way down. The same goes for the doors. You have no idea how many times I have brained myself on aviary doors built this high. Build it a decent size, then the whole thing is just so much easier to work with. Because the external door has a good lock, the internal doors don't need anything special, nor does the feed ledge. So both the internal door, which again is a good size, and the feed ledge, which is a drawer which slides out, the food is dropped in, the birds don't see it arrive, and pushed back in. Both of these just have a very simple wooden catch to stop them coming open. The whole thing is very simple, very easy, very good to manage, and it generally makes life a lot easier. I can never understand why anyone builds an aviary that looks horrible. We try here to make them look reasonably attractive, so we usually plant a tree. The birds don't sit in them very often, but at least it makes us feel better about the aviaries. They're built with a concrete block base, which we paint so it looks reasonably attractive. Good sized timber. The wire is painted black so you can see through it easily, and there's hard core and gravel on the base, which is more comfortable for the birds and washes clean with the rain. For a nest ledge this high, you've got to be able to get up here. You can either do it by coming up a ladder on the inside or with an access door. We use both methods. But for me, the most important thing about a nest ledge is to build a decent sized one. So many people just put a tiny nest ledge across one corner, and half the time there isn't even room for both birds there. And if you imagine both birds plus babies, you're getting really squashed. Here in this enormous aviary, we have a huge area, but wherever you are and whatever the aviary, build it all the way along one end. You give the adult birds room and their own space, and it means that the baby birds can actually play, and what's more, they do. Now, for all the birds that build nests, we do it for them. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they say, that's not good enough, we're going to build our own. But you would be amazed at the amount of stimulation you can have with birds when you put in something like this. This is huge because this was built for eagles. The only ones that we don't do that for are the falcons and the owls, who don't build their own nests. After this year, I'm actually going to carpet the floor of the eagle's nest because we've already had 2 breakages of eggs. But generally you want something soft on the floor if you can. And once you've built a nest like this, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of sticks, we put a lining of clean, and you can get sterile hay inside for the birds to lay. I think aviary design is the key to captive breeding. You should build well and build to last. A decent hardcore base with fine gravel or sand, and 3 solid sides. I prefer a solid roof, but with plenty of light panels. and a service passage with good access doors. And remember, a decent-sized nest ledge is vital not only for the parents, but hopefully for all the babies you're going to produce as well.
Brilliant! And you have to be very quick, and then Celtic takes the rabbit. And we get the eagle. No, you can't have the rabbit. Come here. Celtic. Oh, Celtic. Well, I told you about taking the rabbit from the eagle.
Well, there we go. Celic's helping as usual. Firstly, it's his nose, and last week he got stooped into by a falcon at about 70 miles an hour. You'll be glad to hear that both survived. Now, when putting your birds together, compatibility is all important, and I should know. Your pair of breeding birds have got to like one another. What you're looking for is preferably no aggression, and hopefully at least some sitting together. But don't worry if the pair appear to ignore one another for most of the time. Once they're the right age to breed, and that will depend on the species, the female should let the male go down to the food first at the start of the breeding season. Next should come food passes, and probably they'll be quite noisy too, and hopefully mating. Nest building or scrape making, if it's a falcon or an owl, should come, and very often you will hear much more than you will actually see. The only exception to all the rules are goshawks, and with them, throw the rulebook away, do lots of research, and pray. To get one of those, you need one of these. And at some stage, if you're lucky, you should get your bird starting to lay eggs. When they lay, it can be quite frightening because a bird goes into egg lethargy before it lays, which means very often they look quite ill. And sometimes it's not easy to know the difference between a bird that really isn't well or is just not looking well because it's about to lay. So it's something you want to watch out for. Once the bird has started to lay, they normally don't sit unless it's going to only lay one egg in a clutch, which some species do. That you need to find out beforehand. But normally they don't sit until they're half to 3/4 of the way through the clutch, and that'll depend on how many they're going to lay. And we will then leave the eggs with the birds for 5 to 7 days before going in and taking them. We take them in a bowl, which is filled with cotton wool. The cotton wool is clean every time, as is the bowl. And in that way we make sure that there is a minimum risk of infection to the eggs while being moved. There are several ways you can go about hatching eggs. You can either leave it to the parent birds, which is by far the easiest way, and there's far less work involved, or if you're going to be very serious about captive breeding, which we are here at the National Birds of Prey Centre, then you've really got to use incubators. This incubator has got some owl eggs in it. Actually, taking the owl eggs is about the most hazardous thing we have to do, because the owls don't like you taking their eggs away and they can get very cross about it. So we usually have to put on battle dress to do it. In this incubator we have great horned owl eggs, Harris hawk eggs, Saker eggs, common buzzards, 2 red-headed merlins, peregrines and snowy owl eggs. Here we've got Harris eggs, more Saker eggs, merlins, another clutch of merlin's eggs, and this is a peregrine Barbary egg. In this incubator we have 4 black sparrowhawk eggs, red kite eggs, red-tailed buzzard's eggs, if you're in America you'd call them red-tailed hawks, 5 merlin eggs, 1 miserable barn owl egg, 2 more white-faced owl eggs, 1 just hatching, 3 gay-bar goshawk eggs, and the tiny jobs are African pygmy falcons. Now the incubator room is obviously fairly important. You need a room which is easy to keep clean and easy to keep warm. This room is very easy for both. It's got 3 internal walls, only 1 external wall, and being like a giant public lavatory with these glazed bricks, it's very easy to keep clean, and you can write rude messages on the wall as well. Now 5 of the incubators that we have in here are used for incubating the eggs, and 1 is used for hatching the eggs. They all run at 99.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and I don't have any water in any of them except for the hatching incubator, because the humidity in the room, and I've got a hygrometer on the wall, is already between 50 and 60%. And that's for most of the time in Britain. It's rare it drops much below 50. So the humidity in these will be about 35 to 40, which is what you need, or what I find works very well for hatching the eggs. Now, anybody who's experienced will have noticed that the first incubator we filmed is actually not full of bird of prey eggs. It's full of chickens' eggs. But the reason for that is that a fox got in the other night and killed all my chickens, and that's all that's left of my flock. Incubators usually will have hot spots. They'll have an area where perhaps it's a little bit warmer and an area where it's a little bit cooler. So it's very important when you first get your incubator to get it running and settled, and it takes a while to get them settled, and then to map the incubator. To do that, you've got to have thermometers, and it's best to have a decent thermometer. I think we pay around £5 for each of the mercury thermometers that we use, and they will measure between 95 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't need the whole spectrum, that's all you need. We also use a small electronic thermometer as well. When you get your thermometers, test them out. Put them all into a cup full of ice, bring them right down, and then put them all into an incubator, all in roughly the same place, and test that they all read the same, so you know you're working with equipment that is good, because the incubator can be as good or as bad as you like, but unless the thermometers are reading accurately, you don't know what you're playing with. I use Rolex incubators. I don't think it really matters what you use, so long as you know how the machine works. What I usually suggest to people is that as soon as they've got an incubator, get it in the winter and take it to bits 3 or 4 times and put it back together again. By that time, when the breeding season comes, you won't be frightened of it. You'll know how it works. Now, we've got 6. At this time of year, they're running flat out. We have 1 over here with an extender, because in it we have the larger eggs, bald eagles, secretary birds. We did have golden eagles we'd hoped were fertile but weren't, and African hawk eagle eggs. If you put them in these incubators, when you put the lid down, you squash the egg, which is not a good idea. But in the other incubators, what I try to do is I have a grid of netlon. It's a windbreak you can get. And it means that I can lie the eggs on their side, which I think is a much more natural position for an egg to be. These are actually designed so that the egg is put in point down. But if by any chance an egg sticks, when the grid moves to turn the egg, it takes the bottom off. If you lie them on their side, that can't happen. It also means that I can put in different sized eggs, and here we have eggs from tiny pygmy falcons up to the secretary birds, which are huge, and sometimes we'll have big eggs and little eggs in the same incubator. So we have the grid, the netlon between the 2 grids, and then we can put any sized egg in. The eggs are turned 24 times a day by the machine, and I hand turn them 5 or 7 times a day. The turn is 180 degrees one way and then 180 degrees back the other way. The reason I do it is that it means the incubators are checked on a regular basis, which means that if something goes wrong, there's not a very long stretch of time between the checks, and these eggs can stand a drop of temperature of 12 hours easily. It's amazing what they can actually stand. What they can't stand is a rise of temperature. Much over about 102 degrees, and you'll be very lucky to hatch them. That's Fahrenheit. It also means that if somebody starts to hatch, I see the pip and I can move the egg over. And it also means that if there's a problem with an egg going off, which sometimes happens, you immediately can smell it and take it out. Once an egg starts to pip, we move it out of these incubators and into the hatching incubator. Now this, again, it's a chicken's egg because I didn't have the right egg pipping for the right day, but this is a good pip. It's in the right place, about 2/3 up the egg. If you get a low pip, you've got problems, because that means the bird may have pipped below the air sac. Usually if they do, the pip will look messy and there may be some blood around, in which case you may have to go in and make sure that the bird isn't going to drown, which it can do. We move it into here, and I'm going to put this one in because I want it to hatch even though it's a chicken. And instead of having them like these, just sitting on the grid, we have them in a little hatching box. They're made out of the wire that you actually get with this incubator when you buy it, and we line them with tissue, and I've got some clips on them just to keep the tissue down. Clean them out every time an egg's hatched, which means that you're getting rid of any chance of any disease. And what you've done is you've created a microclimate in there. You've got the same temperature, greater humidity, because we have the water fountain in here. It's the only time I use it. It's not a particularly good thing, but here it's useful. So we've got more humidity so the babies aren't liable to stick. But in there, there's not so much forced air going through. So they're easier to hatch. Once they hatch, take them out of here and we go into the brooder room. We've actually got one just hatched here now. Just hatched this morning. Here we have a white-faced scops owl, about 6 or 7 hours old. We actually moved it out and put it back in for filming. Normally what I would do is leave them in here for an hour until they've dried out, and then I'd move them through. Before moving the freshly hatched baby into the brooder room, we disinfect the umbilical. If any infection is going to get in, that's where it's going to get in. So what you do is you get a disinfectant spray, but don't spray it directly onto the bird. Spray it onto a tissue, making sure you're facing the right direction because you don't look pretty that colour. And then just very gently dab that onto the umbilical of the baby. Cleanliness is vital in an incubator room. It's very easy to bring in disease. So what I do is I clean the incubators on a regular basis. I'll empty an incubator, I may move the eggs over, or it may have become empty because everything's hatched, and I'll move it normally into the sitting room because it's about the quietest room in the house, and I will fumigate it. I usually wash it as well, I think probably just to make myself feel better than anything else, and I fumigate it with potassium permanganate and formaldehyde solution. Now be careful because this stuff is dangerous. So you can actually do yourself an injury. Turn the incubator on and have it running. Cover the bottom of an egg cup with the powder, with the potassium permanganate. Place it into the incubator so that it's steady. Pour in enough of the formaldehyde just to cover the powder. Close the lid. Take a deep breath. Count to 30 and don't breathe while you're doing it. Turn the incubator off and run like stink. Because if you're in the room when these fumes start to come out of the incubator, which they will, it makes you feel absolutely awful. Leave the incubator in the room for an hour. Make sure there are no humans, no dogs, no budgerigars, no nothing, no goldfish. Because I don't know what it does to goldfish, but I know it's not very good for anything else. Then once it's been in there for an hour, you can go in, take the egg cup away, clean it somewhere, away from food and anything it might contaminate, and you then have a fumigated incubator. You can make the hatching box out of anything, but being a conservationist, I use the grid that comes with these when I buy them. All I've done is cut a square, or is it a rectangle, bent up the edges, made a ring with the rest of the wire, and just put some tape around the top so that it's not too sharp. Place one on top of the other, and you just put normally 2 pieces of kitchen towel inside, making sure that the edge is covered so that air isn't coming in through the sides. Just tuck it in, and hey presto, ready to go into the incubator. Sometimes an egg will actually need help. The best rule of thumb is to say leave it 60 hours before you start to interfere. An awful lot of people, when they're first starting to breed birds, will go in much too early, and it's dangerous to do so. So we leave them 60 hours and then we'll go in and help. There will be times when you should help beforehand, but you need to be experienced before you start to do things like that. These days I have a sort of gut reaction about a bird. If I feel that something's not going right, then I will go in earlier. But normally 60 hours, and then if it's not out, you can actually start to assist. Now we've got in here an egg that I'm going to do a little bit of assisting with. Again, it's a chicken's egg, I'm afraid. Now when I looked at this egg earlier, I wasn't happy that it hadn't moved since I last saw it, although it's doing things now. So what I did was I opened it up with a pair of lethal looking tweezers here, and you just see where the pip is and you go in above, because then you should be above the air sac. If you're worried, and it's a very valuable egg, with the chicken it's not quite so vital, although I do want to hatch it, then you can check with the candler and you can actually see where the air sac is, mark it with a felt tip pen, and then go in above the felt tip pen mark. But I've just gone in very gently here with a pair of tweezers and just making sure I'm above the air sac, breaking off small bits. Now when you break off bits of the egg, you do it very gently, making sure, if possible, that you don't touch the membrane at all. This is the membrane here. Once you've made a reasonable sized hole, I then use a paintbrush, which is disinfected regularly, as are the tweezers, usually with Milton, but don't leave metal standing in Milton. I think it does something peculiar to it. Damp it in clean water. If you've got sterile water, it's better still. And then you just touch the membrane with the paintbrush. And as soon as you damp that membrane, it's like magic. It's like one of those pictures that you rub with your hand, and suddenly it arrives, and you'll see all the blood vessels. You'll see whether or not they're still pushing blood through, or whether or not they've started to close down. If they're still pushing blood through, don't go in. If they've started to close down, you may be able to go in and interfere. Now this should make the membrane transparent. Doesn't like it, it's cold. And you can see that this baby is now ready to come out. You see where the blood vessels were? There's one there. Another one coming down here. You can see a lot of movement and hear a lot of noise, which is a good thing. Don't be put off that this is a hen chick. Exactly the same will happen with any chick, be it an owl or an eagle or any of them. They all hatch in the same sort of way. So you're looking for the same sort of thing regardless of what species it is. You're looking for this membrane to have dried and for the blood vessels to have closed down. And in fact, I could go in and help that baby out right now. There's only one danger to doing this. Once you take away the shell and you expose the membrane, it's going to be much more prone to drying out. So there will be times when, if I'm worried about a bird and I think it may take a long time to get out, I'll move it out of this incubator, the forced air incubator, and I'll move it into the brooder room where I've got still air incubators, and I will get it out of the egg in there so the forced air is not drying out the membrane too fast. To really know what's happening in incubation, you can weigh the eggs down to see how they're developing. An egg should lose 15% of its weight between fresh egg weight, that's the day it was laid, through to pip. It's 18% to hatch, so it's 3% on the last 2 or 3 days of hatching. The problem with this is you've got to know what weight the egg was when it first was laid. And this is one of the reasons we don't do a lot of weighing, apart from the fact that we don't have very much time here anyway. Unless you take every egg as it's laid, you can't tell what its fresh egg weight was. And even if you pull the eggs out as a clutch, you don't necessarily know which egg was laid first. There is a formula that you can get, which I think you can find in Falcon Propagation, which is a book produced by the Peregrine Fund in America, where you can actually calculate what the fresh egg weight is. It's supposed to work well with falcon's eggs. I don't know how it would work, for example, with a great horned owl egg, because I don't suppose anybody's done a tremendous amount of work. If you've let your eggs have a week of natural incubation and you've got your incubators running right, I don't think this is particularly necessary. But if you're not happy and you want to weigh them down, get yourself any weighing machine. This weighs down to tenths of a gram. This owl egg actually weighs 58.69 grams. And what I would do if we were charting it is I would write the date, the weight, when it came in, the days of incubation, and all the relevant information on this card. To see if an egg is going to hatch, you can candle it or look through it with a strong light. Owls' eggs are very easy to see through because they're white and they don't seem to have a lot of colour in the shell inside. So you can actually put it on the light and then gently turning it round, you can see whether or not there's a baby or an embryo developing inside. This helps us a lot with breeding here because it means that if a bird is sitting on eggs that aren't fertile, we can take the eggs away, and if she lays more eggs, there's a chance that the second clutch may be fertile. This is an owl egg which is not going to hatch. It either died very, very early on or else it was infertile. And you can see the yolk is moving around as I turn the egg. This is the yolk here, this dark round patch. And really nothing much is happening. These dark marks are the actual writing and arrows on the outside. Now I'm going to show you an egg that is developing. Here we have an egg which is just starting to develop. As I turn it round, you should see that the light will come through half of it there at the bottom. That's what's called half shading. So the egg is starting to develop. As I turn it, it goes dark again, darker still, and then coming round to the other side, the half shading starts to show. What I don't think can see very easily is that at the top here I can actually see the heart and blood vessels developing across the egg. For anyone wanting to captive breed birds, this is an important piece of equipment. You don't have to have this one. I mean, this comes from America. I don't know how easy they are to get. It was given to me. You can easily make your own, the Blue Peter Touch. All you do is you get an old coffee tin, put a light bulb in a socket on a piece of wood, coffee tin over the top, cut a hole, get a piece of sponge like this, and it will work exactly the same way this does. You should be able to see through all but the darkest of eggs. And if you then close curtains and make the room dark, it's easier to see what's happening. When you're candling an egg, don't leave it still on the light or it may get overheated. Very gently turn it, and I mean gently because if you move too fast you can detach the embryo. And if you just gently turn it, you're looking for half shading if it's in the early stages after about a week, maybe a little bit more development later on, and as it gets well developed, the whole of the lower 2/3 or more will be solid and you should be able to see a good air sac. If you want to know what you're looking for, either practice with some chickens' eggs or get an incubation book and look it up and see what the development is. This wonderful room here is the brooder room. Once the babies hatch, they get taken out of the incubator room and brought into here and put in what we lovingly call the ovens. These are 2 still air incubators. That means the air in here is not being blown around by a fan, and it runs at 95 degrees Fahrenheit. They'll stay in there for probably 2 or 3 days. Some of them are even smaller than that. Here we have the most ridiculous size. You don't get much smaller than that. That's an African pygmy falcon that's trying to eat my finger. Once they've been in here probably 2 or 3 days, it would be longer for a bird as small as a pygmy falcon or a barn owl. They'd probably stay in there up to about a week. Then we move them out of these over into the brooders here, where all that's happening is that they have a heat lamp over them, keeping them warm. These incredibly attractive grey boxes are water tanks that have had the bottom cut off. They're very useful because they're easy to keep clean, they're very easy to scrub out each morning. It means that the birds don't get droppings all over the place, and it keeps them reasonably warm. The birds will move here from the Bristol incubators under these lamps and stay here for about 2 weeks. By that time the rings will be on and they will then be ready to go out to their parents. Now in here, believe it or not, this is the owl that you saw hatch or just hatched a week ago today? You can use any sort of container for the babies. This is a washing up bowl. I think it's a caravan washing up bowl actually. But the surface inside must be the right one. If you just put tissue into this, the birds would slip, their legs would splay out, and within a very short time, a matter of 10-15 minutes, you would have days of work getting them right again. So we have sand in these. This is actually dune sand, so it's nice and soft. It's been washed by the sea. And at each feed, 4 times a day, we make sure there's a good deep cup so that the birds' legs are kept tucked in nicely underneath them. Very much like the cup that you would find in the nest that most birds build or in an owl's scrape. Because the sand can be quite dusty and can get into their eyes, and also to keep them cleaner, we'll put 2 pieces of kitchen towel on top, and that'll be changed every time they're fed. To keep a check on what any bird is doing, we weigh them before and after every feed. So if you look at this card, you'll see that this owl has been weighed 8 times a day for the first 6 days of its life. Then once they start to do better, we weigh them just once a day. We chart down the weight to see what's happening. Now to weigh them, you put them gently on the tissue there. And at the last weighing this morning, he weighed 55 grams. So we put on 50 grams. And see, he's now up to very nearly 60 grams. He's put on 5 grams in the last few hours. So that weight would be charted down and he would be taken out and fed. The babies are fed 4 times a day. Usually we start at 8 o'clock in the morning, then again lunchtime, around 6 at night, and the last feed is at about midnight. Here we've got some Harris hawks and a caracara. This can't go back with its parents, which is why it's so large and still here. And we're feeding all the babies on a mix of day-old cockerels, quail, grown-on chicken, and rats all minced together. And I can tell you with great experience that if you try and mince whole rats with a Kenwood mixer, it'll blow up. We use, to feed the birds, tweezers or forceps. If you're scientific like Melanie, they're called forceps. If you're not scientific like me, they're called tweezers. And they have a curve to them, which makes it easier for us to pick up the meat. Although they're quite sharp, I have never had a bird injure itself on them, and they're nowhere near as sharp as a bird of prey's beak. You just pick up the meat, and if it's a hawk like these, and these are almost ready to go back, you just wave it in front of them, and as you can see, they dive at the food with the greatest of pleasure. With the owls, you touch the side of the beak, and we'll show you that in a minute, and the falcons hold their beak open and scream or beg for food, and you have to actually put the food in the beak before they'll respond.
Stuffed. It's going to explode.
With the diurnal birds of prey, it's very easy to see how much they've had to eat because this bulge here is a crop. So once it's full, that's all they need to eat. If when you go to feed them the next time, the crop has still got meat in it, you just don't feed them. Owls are much more difficult because owls don't have a crop. The food goes directly into their stomach. So you've got to put a finger very gently and feel their stomach, which is just between their legs. If it feels soft and flaccid, then it means that they're not still full of food and you can try feeding them. Now it's a question of touch. They don't see the food coming. They've got perfectly good eyesight, but they don't look for it like the hawks or the eagles do, and they're not sitting begging like the falcons are. So you bring it in and you touch one side or other of the beak, and as soon as you touch, if they're hungry, they'll respond and take the food from the tweezers. Captive breeding can be incredibly rewarding. Here we have two species that nobody else in this country is breeding at the moment. This is a baby black vulture. I know it's brown, but it is a baby black vulture. And this is a baby secretary bird. She's on her first day out today. But it's a hell of a commitment. And if you really want to get into it, you have to be prepared to have masses of time, to make sure that you don't have any time off during the breeding season, and also be prepared to commit a fair amount of money to what you want to do. If you just want birds for yourself, quite frankly, I would say don't spend the money on captive breeding. Buy the birds you want from somebody who's already doing it and producing birds that you know are good. If you want to go into captive breeding, be prepared to spend almost all your money and almost all your time, and to have the most incredible disappointments as well as the most incredible exciting things happening. As with almost anything, there are legal formalities to be gone through when captive breeding. To find out more about the law, and you must do this if you're going to breed birds of prey, you should either get hold of the Department of the Environment in Bristol, and they'll tell you all you ought to need to know, or else you can buy a copy of the Wildlife and Countryside Act from Her Majesty's Stationery Office. All captive bred birds have to be ringed with a Department of the Environment ring. This is sent to the breeder unless it's one of the 5 sensitive species of birds, which are peregrines, golden eagles, merlins, goshawks and gerfalcons. If it's one of those, then a Department of the Environment inspector will bring the rings and witness the ringing. This is a Harris hawk. It's now 11 days old and it's ready to be ringed. The ring goes on with the numbers the right way up, so you can read it. The front 2 toes are put together. The ring slides over. The back one goes back towards the leg. The ring goes over the top. And once it's on, it shouldn't come off again. When I talk about captive breeding being expensive, I really am quite serious. I think some people have the mistaken idea that if you breed birds, you're going to make a lot of money. I really couldn't tell you how much we make from selling some of the birds that we sell, because the Falconry Centre eats money like nobody's business. But if you really want to go into it, get yourself a calculator and find out how much it's going to cost you before you start. I don't think you can put up even the smallest aviary properly for under £1,000. It's very unlikely, if you're going to get a reasonably interesting pair of birds to breed from, and ones that you can actually get rid of the young from, like say Lanners or Harris hawks, you're not going to get a pair of those, and remember they're going to be a young pair, for under £1,200 to £2,000. You've then got to wait 3 to 4 years before they're going to do anything. They're going to be sitting in the aviaries costing you food and possibly costing you vet bills. So you could be looking at a cost, probably not even counting your own time, of somewhere around £5,000 before you've even produced your first young. And finally, the one ingredient we couldn't film, we couldn't show you, that I very rarely display and that you will definitely need, is patience. Here we have, for example, 2 golden eagle eggs, which you can see I'm not treating with the greatest of respect because yet again they're infertile. And behind us we have the lady who lays them. For years we've been trying to breed from Sable. This year we managed to artificially inseminate her. 1 egg could have been fertile, and guess which egg she broke. Captive breeding is a long line of enormous highs where things go right and desperate lows where things go wrong, and you must be prepared to accept those. So look out for the patience, and I wish you the best of British luck. We're now 2 weeks on. These babies have grown, have had their rings put on, and are now due to go back with parents or foster parents. So we're going to go into the aviary. We've already taken the eggs and put a clean nest lining in, and these babies will be put in with red tails, who will then finish the job rearing them until they're full grown, and they'll then come out of the aviary and be ready to be trained. Some parent birds will just fly off the nest, and you can safely go in, take eggs and return young. Others will defend the nest vigorously, and the only way to find out can be extremely painful. With my red tails I don't worry about the male, but I do catch up the female in a net and leave her there, releasing her only after the young are safely in the nest and I am well away from it. These are young Harris hawks whose real parents unfortunately didn't recycle this year, and so the red tails are going to finish the rearing for me. Once the young are hard down, that is, fully feathered, we remove them from the parents' aviary and usually put them in a secluded pen in a group on their own. In this way they will become a little more mentally adult before training. When you're going to catch up your young, use a net. It's so much easier and much better for the birds. Go in and get the job done as quietly and as quickly as you can. Good news, got 3 females. You're puffed. What do you think I am? And there you have it, a fully fledged, captive bred, second generation female Harris hawk, almost ready to train. And that, as they say, is all there is to it. A piece of cake.
Okay.
Once you get to this stage, you have to think about what you're going to do with the birds. Very few people are going to keep as many of them as we do. So this is where your morals have to come into play. If you're going to keep them, they've got to be flown. If you're going to breed from them again, you mustn't use brother and sister pairs, otherwise you're going to produce junk birds in the long run, and that isn't fair for the birds. And if you're going to sell them or give them away, you must make sure that they go to good homes. I bred all of these birds. It was hard work. It's a tremendous commitment. It's also extremely expensive. But when you get to this stage where you're training a young falcon, who not only you bred, but you also bred her parents, that's what makes it all worthwhile. Put that foot up.